What's up, guys? It's Reynad back, and today I'm finally going to record the Artifact game review that I've been promising to you for some time now. It has taken a while to get there, so I'm sorry about that. But yeah, for those guys that don't know, Valve is about to release a brand new digital card game. It's highly anticipated. Valve's one of the greatest game developers of all time, and one of the most unique game developers in the entire industry. So it's really exciting when they launch a new title, and a lot of people are curious about it and kind of looking forward to the game. So I figured it's a good time to record the video. This is something I promised to have out to you, a month ago, but I've just been so busy I haven't gotten the opportunity to get it out there. Unfortunately, I couldn't get this out before the beta started getting streamed. Regardless, I'm gonna pump it out now. Now, Artifact's a game that I've been getting a lot of questions about for the past few months. People have been wondering, like, what do you like about it? What do you not like about it? Have you tried it? Just tell me about the game. They just want to hear thoughts about it. And, a couple times on stream, I did kind of talk about, certain things that I do or don't like about the game. And they weren't received particularly well because a lot of it was unpopular opinions. A lot of the other card game players in the industry were touting it as like the greatest game ever designed. And I was the first person to kind of talk about some of the things I don't like about it. Yeah, it wasn't received particularly well. Like a lot of message boards, especially like on the subreddit for the game, they started personally attacking me, and apparently I hate all other card games because I'm releasing my own, and it's in my own vested interest to shit talk every competitor. While I was saying those things about Artifact, I was playing Magic Arena, complimenting Magic Arena. But yeah, never mind. Let's not get facts in the way of a good story, I guess. Anyway, I figured, rather than just saying 2 sentences about the game and then letting it blow up into the dumpster fire of shit talking that happens on Reddit, I'll actually give a comprehensive review and talk about the individual pros and cons, things that I do like, things that I don't like about the game, and kind of give you guys a more comprehensive idea of, what to look forward to about it, and kind of my thoughts. So keep in mind, this is subjective. Every single game appeals to different kinds of players and all of that. But yeah, with all that said, I'm just going to kind of get into it. So what are some Artifact's greatest strengths? Let's start with that. So first of all, visually, I think this is easily the best looking card game that's ever been made on any platform ever. The game is just beautiful. It looks so much better than I expected any card game to ever look that it jumped 3 tiers above whatever number 2 was. The game looks so clean. It's just beautiful. Every element of it. It's beyond Pixar level animations. Just aesthetically, everything fits really well. There's this weird like Atlas circle looking thing that the board sits on, and the board like unfurls from this box right when you jump into a game. The shop that pops up is beautiful. Everything about the game just looks incredible. Right down to the water graphics in the middle. It's aesthetically just, they killed it. A great job with the game. And that really just goes to show just how well Valve executes when they do release a game, and they give it the polish that they're known for. So that's a big plus. It's easily the best in class of any card game visually, in my opinion. Again, art's more subjective, but I think a lot of people would agree there. The other thing, from a very high level standpoint, as far as gameplay goes, Artifact's biggest strength is, it's Richard Garfield's biggest strength, which is that the rules engine of the game is actually very, very good. If you were to explain it to somebody, or just to understand, to try to just look at one element of it, it's all very simple. But then, collectively, the rules engine that creates ends up being pretty intricate and nuanced. It has a lot of depth, which is pretty awesome. So, in order to win the game, you have to kill 2 towers, right, on 2 different lanes, or you kill 1 tower 2 times. That's how you win the game. So it's a pretty simple way to describe how to win the game at a high level, but then within that, you have a lot of nuance, right? And you have your items on your heroes, you have a lot of different abilities, you have different colors, the mana goes up the way that it does in a game like Magic or Hearthstone, where you get 1 more every turn, but you have an individual mana per lane. You can ramp that, you can lower your opponent's mana. There's a lot of options within that rules engine. So I think, to give a lot of credit to Richard Garfield, he's just, probably the best game designer in the world, at least within card games, at creating a unique rules engine that has a lot of depth within it. So one of Artifact's greatest strengths is its depth. This is something that it does so much better than other card games. What I mean by depth is that you don't feel like you can solve the game in 50 hours. You don't feel like it's clear that X, Y, and Z is the best strategy and always will be the best strategy until there's an update. You really do feel like you're constantly discovering new things. There's a lot of way that you have to get your execution and ordering correct when you're competing against somebody, to the point where even if you knew what the best strategy was, it's very hard to execute that flawlessly every time. And because of that, you don't feel like you're playing half a game. You don't feel like it's solved, or that you know all there is to know about it after playing for a week of the new expansion, which is great. That's something a lot of card games struggle with because of having a very simple rules engine and having very limited design space. So Artifact, doesn't have very many of those limitations. The Artifact design team talks a lot about things like you can have endless amount of creatures in play or limitless numbers of cards in hand. And I mean, those things are true. I don't think they're the reason for the game's depth at all. For what it's worth, very rarely does that matter ever. In 1% of your games will it matter that you can have 20 creatures or that you can have 20 cards in hand. It's very rare. That's not the cause of the depth in the game. It's just something that doesn't really limit the designers in terms of design space, which is great. It's going to be really good moving forward in future expansions. But yeah, these days you do see a lot of card games as just a way for publishers to cash in on existing IP. It's like, for example, if you own the rights to SpongeBob SquarePants, yeah, you can release a couple more T-shirts and make more money that way. But you can also release SpongeBob SquarePants, the card game, because it's going to cost you 1/10 of the usual game design cost to create the game. Card games are much more inexpensive to develop than like MMOs or shooters or whatever. So it's a very inexpensive type of game to churn out, and you see a lot of publishers try to just cash in on existing IP through releasing a card game. Artifact definitely does not do that. Like, it does use the Dota universe and the lore, and that's awesome, but it doesn't, it's not like they're trying to cash in on Dota players a little bit more. This game it really does stand on its own. The rules engine is unique. It just has a lot of depth. It is fun to play with, and it will be the rules engine overall. That is, I think given a few expansions, it will be very fun to play with. Right now, it does have some limitations, but yeah. Anyway, they did a great job on depth. Did a great job on visuals. They did a great job on the overall game engine and rule set. These are like big pluses. These are like some of the hardest things to get right. Valve did a great job on these things, so props to the design team there. The game does have a lot of drawbacks at the same time, and I do want to talk about these because I think they're very important to understand. And I think a lot of these drawbacks are things that, if those of you guys have been watching my YouTube videos for a while, these are things that I personally see as the wrong way of designing a card game. And I've been making videos about this for years. So first of all, I want to talk about randomness in Artifact. A lot of you guys are going to you have pitchforks ready to scream about how dare they charge me $20 to do things. But let's fuck the pricing conversation and actually talk about what the game is, because for whatever reason nobody feels mad about paying $60 for Call of Duty, but God forbid somebody charges $20 for a card game. I care so little about the pricing part of the conversation. I'm going to save that for the end, but for now, I want to talk about randomness in Artifact. The purpose of randomness in a video game and how Artifact does it. So I made a video about this. I forgot what I called it. It was like the different types of randomness in card games, or randomness in card games. Hopefully the editor can make it pop up here or something. But highly recommend you guys watch that video that I made a couple years ago, because it's very good. I think it's one of the best videos I've ever made. And I think it really applies directly to Artifact. And one of the reasons I don't like a lot of the individual card design, and the reason I don't like some of the mechanics in this game. Why is randomness in video games at all? And randomness is actually really important to have in video games. It's because you want to make sure that every time the game is played, it plays in a different way. So you're not just playing the same game with the same steps over and over and over again. Randomness is a way to make every game feel different. Now, there's lots of ways to make a game accomplish that feeling of like the game playing in a different way, and you do that through different types of randomness. I think on a very high level, there's two different types of randomness, at least in card games, that are used. Number one is like the blunt randomness, which is where a card will have a random effect, and certain outcomes are strictly better than certain other outcomes. So an example, an artifact of a card like this is Bounty Hunter, which every turn you flip a coin. If you win the coin flip, it has +4 attack. An example in Hearthstone is, let's say Crackle, right? Crackle does 3 to 6 damage. It's strictly better to do 6 damage than to do 3 damage. So the card, that type of randomness, have strictly better or worse outcomes. And then, so that's one type of RNG, that blunt type of randomness, which I think is abysmal. I think it's lazy. I think nobody should ever design randomness in a game that way, because the other type of randomness accomplishes the same goal, without pissing off one of the two players in a game every time it happens. The thing about Bounty Hunter's ability, for example, the straight up coin flip one, is 100% of the time that coin is flipped, one of the players in your game is pissed off. One of the two players, 100% of the time, is being upset and having a bad experience because of that ability. Yeah, the game plays differently because Bounty Hunter got to kill a hero. He only gets to kill half the time. But the player who is playing against the Bounty Hunter got really cheated there, and he feels really terrible. And vice versa, like, if you're the one playing with Bounty Hunter and you fail to win the coin flip and you like can't kill a hero because of that failed coin flip, then you're the one that's upset. So every time you have that type of randomness where certain outcomes are strictly better or worse than other outcomes, one of the players in your game ends up having a bad experience. And it's really frustrating to me because Artifact has so much of this type of variance. Like almost every random effect in the game is this kind of effect. And just if you want to learn about like the other types of variance, go ahead and watch that YouTube video from earlier. I'm not going to go into it here because there aren't really examples of it in Artifact, or at least very few. Literally none that come to mind right now. So I'm not going to go into that whole dissertation right now. But feel free to watch that video if you want to learn more about that. But so the point is, the way that they did randomness in Artifact is that you have so many of these abilities and so many of these cards that they have random effects for the purpose of making the gameplay differently every time, which is fine, but all of the random effects have strictly better or strictly worse outcomes. Another example is like Ogre Magi, right? When you play a blue spell, 25% of the time, you get to make a copy of it and put it in your hand. It's like rolling Spell Power Totem off a Spirit Claw in Hearthstone. It's like, why? Like there's a way to have, I don't know, it could be like every time you play a blue spell, add a random, 8 cost spell to your hand, or like add a spell from this range of 4 spells that are equal power level. But instead you either get nothing or you get to duplicate a spell, which is insane. Like it's extremely volatile RNG. It just ends up with one of the two players being upset, depending on who got bodied. And I don't think there's a reason to have that in the game. Probably the least fun card in the game to play against is got to be Cheating Death. When I started playing in the beta, this card cost 3 mana, and people would play it turn 1. And like this card was pretty broken, but the stats didn't reflect it. Apparently, it had a pretty like even win rate. They nerfed the card to 5 mana, and still, when you play against it, it's just so infuriating. Like, for those of you guys that don't know what that does, I mean, I assume we pulled up a graphic for it, but yeah, 50% of the time, whatever dies just doesn't die. It's like not okay. That makes the gameplay differently, but I don't want to feel like there are such volatile coin flips determining whether I win or lose. So I think the way that Artifact does randomness is very, very infuriating. I think is a really big drawback just from a game design standpoint. And if they wanted to incorporate randomness on that many cards, they could still do it. It just has to be different kinds of randomness. You can't have these outcomes where it's like either you get nothing and you sunk 5 mana into a Cheating Death that does nothing, or all of your stuff's indestructible and you just win every coin flip and you can't lose the game. It's like when that type of randomness is introduced in such high quantities, when there's so many cards in the game that work that way, you feel like so much of the game is outside of your control, and you do feel like, it's unfair. And they even have the unstable portal type of randomness in the game, where it's pulling from a range of 300 outcomes or 50 outcomes. An example of this is like Golden Ticket, right? It's an example of a card I would never make in a video game. I would make Golden Ticket give you a random item that costs 12 or less, or a random item that, if it's like a 10 mana Golden Ticket or 10 gold Golden Ticket, if it costs 10 gold to buy, I would say get an item, add items to your hand with a total cost of 10 gold or whatever. So the power level of the stuff you're getting is always the same. But the way Artifact did it is it's just, okay, you pay 9 gold for the Golden Ticket, you get a random item from a range of anything. It could be like the 3 gold one, it could be the 25 gold one, right? And that's not going to upset players 100% of the time. But the 5% of the time that it does upset players, oh my God, does it feel like your decisions didn't matter that game. I played a game on stream today, not today, but 2 days ago, where my opponent had a bounty hunter. He won the coin flip on making it bigger, killed my hero for free because he won the coin flip. Right, played track on it, so it gave him 10 extra gold. Played Payday. This is turn 1, by the way. I had no castable cards. I couldn't decide where my heroes line up or anything. The board just flops on turn 1. All right, so he kills one hero of mine, plays Payday to double his gold, and on turn 2, in draft, he plays Horn of the Alpha, which summons a 14/14 every other turn for the rest of the game. It's like I lost that game on turn 1 without playing a card. I mean, think about that. Like, it's disgusting, and it was because of, again, the coin flip RNG on Bounty Hunter plus the 1 in 40, Barnes type of RNG that the Golden Ticket had. And this isn't just 1 or 2 cards in the game that do this. It's like most instances of RNG in the game work this way, where, I mean, yeah, even like the giant Murloc guy with 18 health, I forgot what he's called. He's a red hero, 2 attack, 18 health, 1 armor. His activated ability flips a coin for every unit your opponent has to decide whether to stun it or not. If you stun your opponent's hero, they can't play spells of that color. The difference between stunning a hero or not stunning a hero is insane. It's like whether you're allowed to play cards that turn. It's so volatile, and it's decided on 50-50s. It's like, I'm not saying that the game is entirely RNG based. I'm just saying that the type of RNG that the game chooses to have from a card design standpoint is really blunt, and it ends up with one of your 2 players being really upset. And just like the last time I said a couple of things about Artifact that I didn't like, there's going to be no shortage of dipshits going into comments saying, "Oh, Reynad, you just hate this game because you're bad at it. You suck." I have about 80 hours in the game. Lately, I'm getting 5 wins almost every single draft I do. Like 80% of the drafts I do, I get 5 wins. I don't know. Like, to call me bad at card games is such a fucking slap in the face. Like, I don't hate that type of RNG because I'm bad. Like, nobody's beating turn 2 Horn of the Alpha. I don't care who you are. There's no decisions to be made there. Yeah, I mean, if you're just a random, shitter online that wants to call me bad at a game that you haven't even played before, stop yourself for a second, ask yourself, is this really something that makes sense? Probably not. I don't know. So, anyway, that's one of my bigger complaints from a card design standpoint. And again, the great thing about this, having this be a problem in the game, is it's very fixable, right? What Blizzard did is basically double down and make more of the cards and watch their player base plummet. I'm not saying that was responsible for it. I think it was mostly the standard rotation and people having to buy too many cards to keep up. Artifact can solve this moving forward by designing randomness in a different way in their game. If Bounty Hunter had smaller stats and then every turn he got either 2 attack or 2 health, but 100% of the time he got one or the other, that would be great design. Or, I don't know about great design, but it would be better design, right? Because getting 2 attack or 2 health every turn is like, it still makes the game play differently every time, but either outcome is like roughly same power level. You're getting 2 extra stats, whereas you either get the 4 attack or you don't, is like, that's a coin flip on whether he's killing the hero in front of him. That's disgusting. Anyway, that's the randomness complaint. The other big gameplay issue, and this one that I'm about to talk about, I would argue, is an even bigger hindrance to the game's success than the randomness part of it, is that for the first 50 hours of the game that you play, and keep in mind, I've won, I'm a pro player in every card game. I've played fucking all of them. And even somebody that's played this as many card games as I have in my life, I had an issue with this thing that I'm about to talk about. So I think the biggest issue with the card design and Artifact is that when you make a decision in the game, at least for your first 50 hours of playing, when you make a decision in the game, it's not immediately clear to the player whether it was a good decision or whether it was a bad decision. It's not immediately clear for you whether you made a mistake and got punished for it or whether you did a correct play and got rewarded for it. And, in something like Hearthstone or, even in Artifact, there's examples of this thing I'm about to describe. Basically, if you overextend onto a board that you're already winning and then your opponent wipes your board with a board clear card, you're like, oh, I made a misplay. I shouldn't have overextended there. That's intuitive. That makes sense, right? If you decided not to kill a creature that ends up running away with the game, you're like, oh, okay, I should have killed the creature when I had the chance to. It makes sense, why I did the right or the wrong thing. If you sequence things in the wrong way and you end up taking extra damage or not killing something that you would have been able to kill had you sequenced it differently, what you did wrong or what you did right. And that's a really important feeling in a video game. You need to know that you need to feel like A, your decisions matter, and B, that you need to know whether your decision had a positive or negative impact on you winning the game. And when a game does those things correctly, you feel like you're getting better as you play the game more. You feel like you learn from every game you play. And it encourages the player to keep committing time to the game and playing it more and more. And Artifact, for whatever reason, for the first 50 hours, I mean, now it's like less of a problem now that I've put more hours into it, but it's still a big problem sometimes. You don't know whether your decision was good or bad for you. And it's infuriating to play with as a player because you feel like you're not improving. You feel like maybe your decisions just didn't matter because you don't know whether it helped or hurt you. So maybe it just had no impact. Sometimes you do feel like, you're just in a sea of coin flips and your decision didn't impact anything at all. And that's like very frustrating. Like you don't want that feeling of futility. You don't want to feel like you don't know whether your decision was right or wrong. So I don't exactly know how they can address this more. I think this may just be an issue with the rules engine being a little bit too intricate because I don't have solutions here. I'm not gonna pretend to know exactly how to solve this problem, but I think the number one issue for the game will be that, price point aside, somebody buys the game, they get in, they play for 10 hours, they play for 20 hours, and they're losing a lot because it's not an easy game, right? Even if they're winning, they do all these decisions in a game and they're just not learning. They do all these decisions and they're like, okay, well, was it even good to kill the hero? Was it bad to get my hero killed? Like things like that are such a big issue. A lot of people, like on the Artifact subreddit specifically, these masterful players that have never touched the game but will never lose a match in their life, they praise the fact that it's not always bad to have your hero get killed. I think it's bad design. It's like one of the reasons I didn't like a game like Overwatch, for example. Like it doesn't matter if you get a kill, it matters when you get a kill, You don't want to like stagger deaths and things like that. So like in Artifact, the fact that 25% of the time it's correct to let your hero get killed off, the fact that it's wrong to kill your opponent's hero, it's not something to be praised. It's something that is like inherently confusing design to a new player getting into the game. It should be intuitive that, okay, I kill my opponent's hero, that's good for me. Okay, my hero died, that's bad for me. I need to protect my hero. That's intuitive gameplay. And, to like want to kill your own stuff off so often or to want to avoid killing your opponent's hero so often, the fact that those are like the correct lines of play as often as they are just creates like a very frustrating experience for a new player because you're gonna just not know what you're doing right or wrong. I play Counter-Strike and I get out-aimed by everyone when I first start out. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go to deathmatch, I'm gonna improve, I'm gonna get better at aiming. And I get better at aiming and I win more. Like that makes sense, right? I keep running into rooms without flashing and I get killed right away. I keep running through smokes and I get killed right away. And you're like, okay, well, that's a mistake. I will stop being an idiot and enter the right way. Those are good elements of video games. Like it needs to be clear when you're doing something right or wrong, in my opinion. So anyway, that I think is like my biggest issue. For the first 50 hours I played the game, that was so infuriating. It's like better now, but it's not okay to have a 50-hour tutorial, I don't know. There's a reason I don't play Smash Melee professionally, right? Like I'm not gonna have the 500-hour tutorial to learn how to wave dash and L cancel and stuff. Like I shouldn't have that level of barrier to entry to enjoy the game, in my opinion. So that I think will be a big drawback. But again, that's something I think they can sort out down the line. I just don't know how. But yeah, I wanted to point it out as a problem because I feel very strongly that that's a problem with the game. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about, as far as stuff that can be improved in future expansions, is that I want to talk about the way that they did card design in this game. Some of you might have watched my video about archetypes and card game design, and I'm not saying that like the whole archetype structure is the only one or the best one. That's just one way of doing it. You can do micro archetypes that are like 8 cards each, and you have like 20 of those. You can only do the outlier design where you have like certain cards that build archetypes around themselves. There's a lot of different ways to do archetype design within card games. But what about when you don't do archetype design? What do those games look like? The other way of designing cards in a game is like linear card design. It's when you have an idea for a card and you're like, okay, that card sounds cool. I'm going to make that a card. You finish it up and you tweak the numbers and you play with it and you balance it correctly. And you're like, okay, on to the next card. I have an idea for this card. It's going to cost this much. It's for this color. It's going to do this. You finish it and you're like, okay, next card. When you just sit there and go down the line and make like 300 cards linearly, one by one, without zooming out and looking at archetypes or anything like that overall, you end up with, well, with Artifact basically, or like the original like Magic expansions, like Alpha and Beta. It's where you design cards one by one, and the thing that's leading your card design is just mechanics that you think are interesting and cool. You're like, okay, oh, that card's cool. It's a cool mechanic. Let's put that in the game. That's fine to do, but when your entire card collection and every card in the game is designed in that way, you end up with almost no defined archetypes, right? What people call control or call aggro in this game is like so ambiguous that like the control decks will end up playing the cards that are in an aggro deck half the time, or the aggro deck will play cards that are in a control deck half the time. There's no clear-cut defined, I guess, like skeleton for strategies in the game at all. And this can work out. The idea is that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. The idea is that when you put all these individually designed cards into a video game, it's still going to be fun to play with, and then strategies will arise from those individual cards. And that is true. That works to an extent. But I mean, in my personal opinion, there's 25 years of Magic the Gathering design to look back on and show that, okay, yeah, you do want a rough framework of skeletons for certain types of archetypes, because that's how you enable things like synergies in draft, and it's how you enable things like linear proactive strategies in constructed for certain decks. And because we don't have that, what we end up having is just a game with very little synergy among decks, especially in limited, and you kind of end up playing cards because they're good at face value. And very rarely will you be able to take two cards that are like a 2 out of 10 ranking in limited, and because you play them together, they become 10 out of 10s. Like, it's a very rewarding feeling to be able to create a powerful strategy with underpowered cards by paying attention to synergy, by picking cards within this framework that are like built to work together. Artifact doesn't really have that. There's certain cards that do work together, certain 2-card combinations, but in general, it's just a pile of cards that are all in a vacuum, interesting design, but there's no overall framework for the card design outside of, okay, blue is going to have small heroes, good spells with them. Red is going to have good heroes, weaker spells. Black is going to be the make extra money class. Like, Valve did a certain amount of defining what every color does and does not do, which is great. That's a great step. I just do feel like every card in the game was designed in this linear way. And what you end up with is a game where when you do a draft or when you play constructed, you're going to end up picking cards based on how good they are in a vacuum. And you're almost never taking synergy into account. And I think that that's something that is, I feel like it's lacking, because it's something that's so present in other card games. And I think you don't have to go all in on one or the other type of design, but I think Artifact really is missing a lot of these like synergy frameworks, if that makes sense. And I really do think that they need to incorporate more of that. And I realize that this sounds like a very like ambiguous thing that I'm describing. But if you go ahead and go back and watch the archetypes video that I made earlier, you'll kind of at least understand my perspective on it and why I think that that's an important thing to include in a video game. So especially a card game. All right, and then as my final thing about the game that I think could be improved quite a bit is the feel of the cards and their effects. So right now what Artifact is you do a thing, and then your opponent does a thing, and then you do a thing, and then they do a thing. And eventually when both of you are done doing things, the boards on each side of the table just smack into each other and fight each other. So what every turn ends up being is essentially a build-up to this math equation, right? It's just a big math equation in the middle of the board. Then you play a card and you're like, well, I'm going to give my side +5, or I'm going to multiply that by 2. I'm going to subtract 4 from your thing. And then the math equation resolves. Whatever. And the winner is determined more or less. Because of that, Artifact ends up having a lot of these cards that do things like give your melee creeps +2 regeneration, give your hero +3 retaliate. And while these types of modifiers might be interesting from like a math equation standpoint, they're really, really fucking lame cards in a video game. Like, really lame. Like, if I spend 4 mana on a card, and I play it targeting a dude, and what I get out of it is a little icon saying he gets +3 retaliate, the math equation at the end of the turn will be +3 points in my favor. It's just not compelling card design, straight up. Artifact has plenty of examples of cool cards. A card like Slay, just condemn a creep, great mechanic. A card like Payday, double your gold, that's cool. A card like Thunder God's Wrath, where the camera pans over the board and does 4 damage to everything. Like, that's cool. But Artifact is like a disproportionate number of cards that just modify the math equation going into the end of the turn, that it ends up feeling very unsatisfying to play when you play certain cards. And I think this is just like a card design issue. I think this is, you want to have a certain amount of those kinds of mechanics in the game. Things like Avernus's Blessing or Combat Training that just give something +2 attack. They're great, simple cards. They should be in the game. But there's just such an absurd amount of effects like that like, I'll play a card that like modifies this guy's stat a little bit, and then he'll play a card that modifies this guy's stat a little bit. And it's like playing a fucking Kaleidosaur mirror match without ever getting to attack with the big dude. So you just feel blue-balled. It's more of like subjective feel aesthetic thing. But I do think that from a card design standpoint, Valve should prioritize printing the cards that are satisfying to play with rather than the cards that modify the math equation in an interesting way. Like, I'm very good at math. It was my best subject in school. I love math. Like, there's a reason I played card games, like, competitively. It's just that, you know, to the average player, even the non-average player, these modifier effects, there's just too many of them in this classic starter set of the game. And I think that it ends up kind of hurting the gameplay just because of how frequent they are. I think something like, I talked about it on stream a little bit, but when you Doomblade a Baneslayer Angel, or when you, I don't know, Big Game Hunter Ragnaros, these are like satisfying things to do. Big creatures, removal, drawing cards, buffing a lot of stuff with like extra attack can be very exciting. Ramp. These are things that are very satisfying for card game players across all games. Having my melee creeps regenerate their health at the end of every turn for 2. It's like cool. You know, there's no big visual effect from it. The stat on the board doesn't even change. It's just, it changes the math equation at the end of the turn. And I think, at least from an ADD 26-year-old like kid that grew up in the video game world, there's more interesting types of card effects that you can design than that. So yeah, so those are kind of my issues. I think they're very high-level issues, but they're all very fixable. That's the great thing. Like, the overall engine and Artifact is like fine, and the amount of depth it has is great, because that's like a huge thing that was lacking in so many other card games. And the great thing about these things that at least I perceive as problems, all right, it's subjective. Maybe Valve took this into account and they're like, no, we'd rather do it the other way. You know, that's fine too. The great thing about these like things that I perceive to be problems is that they're all fixable. So in the future expansions, when Valve, you know, releases more cards for the game, which they are going to do, all of these things can be rectified. I'm optimistic. I think the game will only get better with time, and I think that Valve has shown to be a little bit more receptive to feedback than most companies. They don't communicate, but they do improve their games over time fairly consistently. And, you know, I'd expect, you know, nothing less for Artifact. I will finally talk about the monetization, because this is something that a lot of people choose to complain about, which I think is personally kind of ridiculous. The game does have a $20 entry price, and Valve did announce that you'll be able to do infinite Phantom drafts for free, meaning that you can do the draft but not get any cards or rewards from doing it. So you can play the game, you know, endlessly by just buying it for $20. And you don't just get the game for $20, you also get a bunch of packs for $20. And those packs have individual cards in them that you can sell on the marketplace. And when you sell them on the marketplace, you know, you can use that money to buy other other Steam games, which is awesome. So I think that the fact that Valve moved away from a closed economy is great. I think some developer had to do it, and I think that Valve is one of the best equipped to do it because of, you know, how effective the Steam marketplace is. I think that it's good that they don't have any free quests or any free progression in the game, because if they had anything that gave you cards just for playing the game, the market could not exist. Every card would be worthless after a couple months. Every time you hand something out for free, you devalue the card economy. So the fact that every card in the system has to get paid for, I think is fantastic, and I think it's the way it should be. You know, we'll see what the decks end up costing. You know, once things are tradable on the marketplace, and once it's very clear what things are worth. But yeah, I'm pretty optimistic. You know, I've done just maybe like 10 drafts or something, and I have a pretty robust collection with a lot of the most important cards already, and I think that's pretty impressive. It's there's only the 3 rarities in the game as far as I'm aware, and getting rares has been pretty doable pretty quickly. So yeah, I don't think it'll be the case where we have $100 heroes or something being sold in the marketplace. In fact, a lot of the most powerful cards in the game they ended up making uncommon. A card like Blink Dagger being uncommon is like huge. That they made that card a rare, that would be like a 3x you need for every deck. The fact that they consciously made so many of the best cards in the game fairly low rarity, I think will be great for the game moving forward. And there's definitely going to be very effective budget decks you can play as well. So overall, my high level impression of Artifact, I realized that I talked about the good stuff at first and then the bad stuff after, but to kind of zoom out and talk about everything holistically, I think that Artifact is the kind of game that is going to appeal a lot to a very specific type of card game player, and it's going to not appeal at all to like a very big portion of the card game playing audience. So it's kind of a game that's going to cater more to the card and math enthusiast. It's going to be a game that it'll appeal to the card enthusiast a lot more than other card games. It's not going to have mainstream appeal to where you're going to have like a soccer mom playing the game on her phone, but it will very much be a game that's perceived to be very competitive, which is great for it as a potential esport. It'll be a game that is, loved by very hardcore card game players. Any type of player that likes a game like Gwent, I think will really like a game like Artifact. At the same time, I think a player that, likes Hearthstone probably will not like Artifact. Overall, I feel like a game like Hearthstone is the type of game that was designed to have a lot of mass appeal. It was the type of game that was designed to be like a 7 out of 10 for almost every player in the world. Whereas Artifact is the type of game that'll be like a 10 out of 10 for the demographic that really likes it, and it'll be like a 2 out of 10 for everyone else. That's kind of my high-level perspective on it. It's not a game that I can just give like a flat star ranking to, like, okay, I give it, 6.5 out of 10 or whatever. I can't do that with a game like this. It's a game that knows who it's targeting. It's a game that, did not compromise for the masses, for better or worse. And the players that love Artifact will really, really love it. And the players that don't like it will play it for 30 minutes and then drop it. Yeah, we'll see. I think that overall we do live in this era right now where if a game is not top 10 on Twitch, it's perceived to be like a dead game and nobody plays it anymore and it's a failure. And I hate that kind of mentality from the gaming ecosystem right now, because you can have a very successful game that maybe isn't the best for streaming, or maybe isn't meant to just blow Fortnite out of the water or whatever. You can just have a good successful game with a healthy community that grows and is good at what it does. And I think that Artifact will most likely fall into that camp. So overall, I think did a great job on it. I think the game will improve a lot moving forward. Hopefully you guys liked the review. So yeah, thank you for watching. I will see you all next time.